So thank you folks for being here. This is the Health Data Commons Global Open Research Commons Profile Working Group, which is going to be abbreviated to HDC GORC WG, because that's a mouthful even worse than some of the other RDA groups that I've seen. And this is officially the first working group meeting. The case statement has not been endorsed, but it has been submitted back to TAB after receiving their review, so we're hoping that endorsement comes very soon. So we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit by having our first meeting, but we're going to go for it anyway. So what we're really going to be talking about today is some methodology, means, and moving forward. And before we get into the content of it, I think it's important for us to do some introductions of the co-chairs. So my name is CJ Woodford. I'm based in Canada. I work for the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And I'm currently a co-chair, but I will be stepping off of this and letting folks who have more experience in the health data space really take it and run with it moving forward. Also giving some more space for more diverse co-chairs. So I'll pass it over to my colleague, Lars.
I'm Lars Eklund, and I am from the National Bioinformatics Sweden and the Swedish National Data Service based in Sweden. And then we have some online co-chairs as well. Lauren, I don't know if she is here yet.
Yeah, maybe I can speak. Can you hear me okay?
Because we're screen sharing here, so I don't really see the Zoom room.
The Zoom room's up here.
Yeah.
Yes, that's our visual of us.
That's us.
Yeah, but Lauren, if you want to try unmuting, we're going to see if we can hear you in the room to introduce yourself.
There we go. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me? You don't hear me.
Okay, so we can't hear the Zoom audio, and we would like to be able to do that if possible, folks.
In the meantime, if you guys would like, us, we're not scary. We won't bite that much, but I think it's a lot easier to interact with people. If you'd like to, we would love it if you. Yeah.
We would like to.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Right. Yeah. No worries. Then we consider you on the front row mentally. All right. Sorry for all the technical issues. We're trying to get there.
Yeah. Okay. I guess we're going to just have to move forward without slides. I'm really sorry, folks. If you are on Whova, you can see in the chat that there is a link to the collaborative notes document. For folks on Zoom, sorry, we can't manage the links sharing in the chat. I might ask some of my other co-chairs online to do that. So the link is on the Whova chat to the collaborative notes. I encourage you to go sign into this session. There is also a link to the slides from there, so we will do a little bit of looking at your own screens. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry if you don't have the power or internet access to do that, but we are limited in this room, it looks like. So please go sign into those collaborative notes. You can see all the slides in the collaborative notes as well. The collaborative notes are also linked on the session page on the RDA website. So if not on Whova, you can see it directly on the RDA session page on for the 24th.
Recording in progress.
Not sure what happened there, folks. Sorry. You maybe want to try one of our introduce ourselves on Zoom again to see if.
Okay, so I'll try unmuting myself. Yes. Okay, great news. So I'm very happy to join, and I'm sorry that I can't be there to help with you, or I wouldn't be any help whatsoever with the technical difficulties. But thanks so much for representing our working group. So my name is Lauren Maxwell. I sit at Universitätsklinikum, which is at Heidelberg University in Heidelberg, Germany. And I'm very happy to co-chair this group with my fellow co-chairs. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren. Bob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Bob Grossman. I'm the director of the Center for Translational Data Science at the University of Chicago. We're involved with a number of health data commons. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm very excited to be part of this working group.
Also have a couldn't be part of the sessions at the moment. China. Like to present her, I don't know that much. All right, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So our last co-chair is Lily from the China Academy of Sciences. She could unfortunately not attend due to conflicts of time. So let's continue then. So this is going to be our agenda for today. We're going to start with a short welcome. Then we're going to do some introduction to the existing work. And then after that, we're going to try and get into more plan timeline and some discussions. And we'll see where we end up next in the final part. So to go on to the next part, it's going to be a little bit of a fun interaction for us for a minute, for some icebreakers. And we have a Menti that you can join if you like. I'm going to try and switch to that. See if we successfully do that. The Menti link. So you can either go and use the code. Crap. My Menti. No, yeah. Sorry, again, technical issues.
Code, right?
Yeah. Don't want to use the code.
Oh, okay.
The code is this one. Sent my Menti, but that wasn't the one. That was,
Did you open it in mine?
I opened it. I might have accidentally closed the tab. Perfect. So very quick little. This is the Menti, and there's the code for it. So you can put in a pin here, where you're from. Where you originate from, you just put a pin, roughly where you're from. You can then see where everything's. All right.
Is the code at the top of the screen large enough for everyone to see if you cannot use the QR code? Looks small to me. I can't see it.
At least some people have managed to put in where they're from. I hope people in Zoom can see this as well and have been able to start putting their pins. Here come some more pins. few minutes so people can get into it. The Menti will, of course, be available afterwards as well and will be put into the collaborative notes. Yeah, so we have people coming from a little bit all over. Some people have not been able to, of course, join in and put their pin in, but we also have collaborators already from China and Australia. So we kind of try and cover the global part. Go to the next slide. And this is a very important slide for us. This is how much do you love abbreviations? Because unfortunately, because of all the long terms, there's going to be quite a lot of abbreviations going on today, but we'll hopefully be able to navigate you through them. Well, we got 3.7 here. People are loving their abbreviations. That's good. Yeah, as CJ mentioned, we have to use abbreviations for the name of the working group, even because of the long amount of words that needs to be specified in order to show this profile. That Lauren is going to tell us what a health data commons is, which we abbreviate as HDC. So yeah, we see there that there is at least not a hate for it. There is the curve towards more enjoying the abbreviations. Now for a little bit more serious slide, and that is, I want you to think a little bit about what you know of what a health data commons is. Do you know how confident are you that you know what global open research common is? And how confident are you that you could explain what the HDCP for GORC IM is? So the health data commons profile for the GORC in international model. At the end, we will also basically ask you to answer the same questions again at the end of the session. And hopefully we will see that you have increased at least the last one. The other one seems to be relatively good. I seem to have a good, knowledgeable crowd here. Well, that is it for now. Thank you for participating in these short icebreakers. And now we will go into more of the structured content. And Lauren will help us with this presentation on what health data commons is.
Great. So just so you know, in the chat, I'm not sure that folks can see the slides, but it seems like maybe that's okay, and we're just going to go through the presentations without being able to see the slides. So maybe somebody in the chat could comment if they can see the slides or not. Oh, you can see them. Okay, that's great. So health data commons. So we have a definition for commons that comes from the GORC working group, the Global Open Research Commons Working Group. And a commons is defined as a global trusted ecosystem that provides seamless access to high quality interoperable research outputs and services And the commons include social and technical elements that work together towards interoperability. So when we think about a health data commons, we're thinking about a commons that's enabling the discovery, use, and reuse of health or biomedical data and other health-related digital objects. So this could be documentation, software, or other semantic objects. And we're considering health data commons as including health data spaces and health data infrastructures. And we think about our commons as including different types of biomedical data. Could be clinical data or data derived from samples, so genetic data or imaging data. So different types of data can be included in a commons. And then going to the next slide. So thinking about the implementation of FAIR and health data commons. So really in this working group, we are thinking about not recommendations for health data commons in terms of how to address the FAIR principles or the trust or the care principles. So we're not interested in being prescriptive or describing or promoting one type of best practice. Rather, what we're interested in is understanding the key metadata that commons need to expose so that we can think about different levels of interoperability across related health data commons. So we'd like to use as a starting point the Global Open Research Commons schema and develop a health profile of that schema so that we can understand and make visible the implementation decisions that commons have or are making in terms of different axes that we'll talk about a bit later. And what's important here is that we're not suggesting ways to implement FAIR or ways to address the trust and care principles. Rather, we're trying to build on an existing metadata schema to describe global open research commons, thinking about what metadata we would need to add or make more granular, make more broad for the health data commons instance of global open research commons. And considering the specific challenges that we face in the health data space in terms of sensitive data, and then the different types of data, the different formats for those data that we are going to think about in the health data space. And we would like to use those metadata as a way to think about where are we at in terms of interoperability of participant level data and metadata for health data commons. And then where are we at in terms of interoperability in the cross-common space? So considering health data commons, along with the other data that we think are important in health, like climate data or environmental exposure data or biodiversity data, data on animal health or oceans data. And I will pass the presentation to my co-chair, CJ, to continue.
Thank you, Lauren. Gonna spotlight the recording again, but apparently that doesn't seem to be the case. So we'll just continue. Okay, there's a little bit of lag, sorry, between the slides here in the room and then Zoom. The Global Open Research Commons International Commons Model. This is something that's been said already today, and what we're kind of basing this particular working group off of. So the idea of the GORC, or the Global Open Research Commons, is that it would be an interoperable fabric or mesh of commons globally, such that researchers have seamless access to the research objects that they need to do research, as well as the services, tools, support, and so on, work with that so that they can actually move the research sphere forward. This is obviously quite ambitious to say that things will interconnect seamlessly on an international level, on a global level, but that's the pie in the sky goal for the Global Open Research Commons. Now, this is not to say that everything has to be open within the commons. So there is consideration here for controlled access management, sensitive data, and this sort of thing as well. But so this is really saying a Global Open Research Commons with the appropriate governance, policies, and consideration for access control. The GORC interest group was created to look at how do we actually get there, and that they are developing a roadmap, or we are developing a roadmap, myself as a co-chair of the interest group, to figure out how do we actually get to that pie in the sky goal of a global open research commons. And the working group, which is having its last session this afternoon, by the way. So if you want to go learn more, there you go. Go to breakout 2. The goal of the International Model Working Group as part of this GORC umbrella was to figure out, well, what do you even need to consider as you build this roadmap? What would a research infrastructure, commons, service provider, what have you, actually need or need to consider specifically to be part of a GORC in the long term? So how do we start planning now for that roadmap later down the road? So the GORC model, or the International Commons model, what we often call the IM, that is telling you what would you need to consider. So not everything in the model you would consider, but it gives you kind of like a set to begin with, and then you can pick what applies to you. That goes up into the roadmap that then says, how do you do it? And then eventually we lead to this global open research commons, which would be the interconnection of these things using the same language and having the same sets of considerations such that you can figure out where they interoperate and where they need to put the work to make sure that interoperation is available. Okay, so that's what it is, where it actually comes from and where the outputs are that this particular working group is going to build on. The GORC interest group created a definitions and typology document saying, well, what is a commons? Just the first step there, and which Lauren has already described earlier. And it was determined that there are essential elements of commons. There needs to be something in every element, but maybe you don't have the same sets of things as other folks, and that's okay. So this was kind of the first piece. Link in the slides to that particular RDA output. It was released it was endorsed as a supporting output last year in October. And we do also have the model itself, all 400 considerations of what you could consider. So lots of things there to choose from in the GORC International Model version 1.1, which was endorsed as an RDA recommendation a couple of days ago. It's up on Zenodo as of like 48 hours ago, I think. We're really good at meeting that deadline for the plenary. So we have all of those considerations of what, and as Lauren has highlighted, the goal of this particular session or this particular working group is to actually put in the, well, then how do we use the model? Because 400 considerations is a lot of things for anybody to go through. And I see some adopters in the audience who have actually done that, so shout out to Rory. And so we want to make sure that there's actual usable pieces to help with that adoption so that it's easier to use, faster to pick up, and better outcomes overall. So the work plan, again, our colleague Lily was unfortunately not able to attend today. She's got a flight in about 2 hours, so, you know, priorities. And so what we really want to come out with is to see what's in the space already for health data commons, health data infrastructures, health data spaces, the different words they might even use to describe themselves, and the different places that they come in that research life cycle, as well as spaces where researchers need them to be. We are kind of copying what the GORC International Model Working Group did, which was have a questionnaire and a speaker series. Get folks to tell us what they're doing and what they need and what their gaps are so that we can feed it into this process of building the profile. We're also going to be having much more open dialogues. These are some lessons learned from the previous working groups, where we want to have essentially a health data commons community of practice, if you will. So we have questionnaires, we're going to have speaker series, but then also trying to coordinate meetings between these groups to kind of kickstart those discussions and come up with ideas that maybe aren't captured in the speaker series by itself or the questionnaire responses. So we're trying to hit all possible ways of capturing this information that's already out there in the health data ecosystem. What this will lead into is a implementation map on top of the GORC International Model. It will also help identify what's a priority specifically for health data commons and where the GORC model is maybe falling down for health data commons, where the gaps are. And one that Lars and I were talking about earlier specifically is research hardware and integrations into these systems. So going directly from a spectrometer right into data deposit. So we already know where some of those gaps are, but we want to make sure that we're capturing all of them in a holistic fashion. So gap analysis, working with the HDCs themselves, understanding what their particular priorities are, and then actually coming up with a technical solution of the profile map, which will be available in a machine-readable schema and knowledge graph. So that it'll be easy to interact with, easy to pick up, and easy to understand. That's the goal, because that is a criticism we've gotten of the model as well. Our timeline is a little messed up, unfortunately. And we do know that it's 18 months for a working group, so please ignore 24 on the bottom and pretend that 24 is 18, and then everything else is correct. And Hillary's like, eh. But the idea is that, you know, this review and the questionnaire will be the first pieces of work because they're relatively easy to get started, right? Getting interest, building interest, getting some of these feedback pieces in, building up the community of practice or the groups of these health data commons working together. That's when, so once these things are kind of kickstarted, we've got some data flowing in, we've got some input from the ecosystem, we can then start actually looking at the comparison between what are people saying they have and they need and they want to see and their issues and challenges versus what's actually in the GORC model currently, and try and I've heard this a lot over the last couple of days, actually, mapping is everything. So try and map that out a little bit better and see where are the gaps in the GORC model, where do we already line up, and what the implementations are of those, so that there's real life implementations of what are your standards for research objects, or what are your standards for metadata? What are your standards for interoperating with your cloud computing infrastructure? This sort of thing. Of course, the last part of this will indeed be the formalization of that profile and implementation map. And then the pilot study to see, does it actually work? Get some of our folks that have participated in the speaker series, the questionnaire, and in these meetings that we will be hosting to say, like, does it work? Does this actually meet the needs? Does this make it easier to use? Is this going to help you with interoperability of your health data commons or your specific infrastructure with the ones that you want to work with? And more importantly, with the global health data ecosystem. And then, of course, alignment and future plan is also in the last couple of months there. Okay, so before we move into discussion, we do actually have one of the tools ready. We've been through the case statement process and through discussions and through the BOF that was hosted at the previous plenary. We have a pretty large list of infrastructures and folks to reach out to, and we want to keep building that. This is by no means saying, okay, we've made the list, we're done. The list has to keep growing, but we want to move on to see build some of the tools and get started on the communication for making this profile and understanding what actually doing the landscape analysis in the first place. So we're going to introduce the tool and then have some discussion on if we think that plan makes sense, if we think the tool makes sense, where maybe it needs to have additions or removals. And then we'll move into some presentations from folks working in the same sphere on lessons learned on their side. Very fast overview, a mix of open and closed questions. If anyone's done questionnaire research before, you know that only having open questions is a nightmare for coding afterwards. You don't know what people are saying. And then you also don't want to have only closed questions because then people can't add context. So we've got a mix. And it's really focusing in on the description, intended audience, and location of your comments. So like, what is it? Your services and integration you already have, what infrastructure you already support, what research objects you're looking at, what standards you might be able to say you're already using. So you can see we're trying to already populate a profile for some of the participants, as well as considerations for the human aspects of rules of participation and access and governance, because those aren't always clear either. Okay, so some discussion questions, and I'm going to see if I can also open the doc and we can look at it, but it is in the slides. I encourage you to go look at it on your own screens if that's easier, especially for our folks on Zoom. So again, what can we maybe remove? Are there things that we should add? And then if we have time, format and more suggestions for who it should be sent to. And I'm going to copy the link and put it into Zoom. Lauren and Lars, do you have anything you'd like to add to that monologue I just did? All right, sorry friends in Zoom. Apparently I can't add it to the chat. The chat has disappeared.
I think I can add it, CJ.
Got it. Last minute. Here we go. Also, this new Google feature of having tabs, I love it, as you can tell. All right, so some basic things. We've already got some additions and comments back and forth between the co-chairs. I'm gonna close this on the side. So I think some of these ones are obvious, as it's not big enough yet, is it? Let's make it 200%. More visible? I can. Some of these are obvious, I think, like who are you at, like what is your organization? So I'm just gonna skip past that because that's gonna need to be included anyway. And then we kind of get into this, how would you describe your health data commons? So the ones that we have here would be, how would you classify the health data resource you work with? What are your funding sources? The hosting country for your health data resources? Where is your target audience located? And then within health, is it generalist or topic specific? Those are kind of the first set of questions. Ideas or comments about that first introduction for folks when they see this questionnaire? Yeah. So the question online was, oh, Lawrence, I did on that, perfect. The question was just, can we put it into the notes for the session? They are now in the collaborative notes as well. So if it doesn't sound like there's any qualms, I also don't see anything happening on Zoom. So we'll keep moving on. Of course, the next question would be if you're not topic, if you're topic specific, well, what topics? So I feel like we can move past that one as well. When was your organization established? It's pretty not a wild question to ask is maybe what I'm trying to say. How would you describe your organization? And then we're going to get into the meat of things, which is more, do you provide multiple services and how do you integrate them? Or do you, maybe is another question that should be here. And then asking about which services do you provide? We already had some comments on this one in particular, around we can maybe assume that all data commons or health data commons provide more than one service, or we can stick with this bifurcation of responses. And this might be a good discussion question to start with, actually. When we think of health data commons, do they typically provide more than one service? Or is it possible for health data commons to provide only one?
At least in Sweden, we know that we have a couple of different ones, and they have a wide variety of mix. Some are very specific, like provide maybe one type of service, and then we have others that are encompass all types of health data from machine to informatics. So it all depends a little bit, I think. So I think having it so that you can have the option to put in one service, I think is very important, so that we don't exclude some that might be small but critical.
I think that's fair. And maybe and kind of the point of this questionnaire and what we'd like to aim for is it to be more inclusive instead of less inclusive, because we know that there's lots of different types of infrastructures that fall under this umbrella of health data commons or build up towards them. So yeah, maybe it makes sense to leave that or maybe reword it in some way if needed. But that makes sense to me to be more inclusive instead of less. Yeah, how do you handle integration? It's open-ended for a reason because that could mean a lot of different things. So we're letting them just go ham with that. And I think something that might have some contention is which services are you providing directly or providing access to. So this is really now a checkbox closed option solution of, or option closed option question of what services are you providing? And this might need some more work in terms of what exact options do we provide. The ones that are here, unfortunately, they're split across 2 pages, but the ones that are here encompass all of the services that are in the GORC model currently, with an other field that they can type in things that aren't included. So this is where we really tried to home in on where do you fit in the GORC model, or does the GORC model accurately describe what you're doing? Or is there things that it's not describing that you'd like to add? And that's what that other field is for. Thoughts or opinions on the list of services that might be options for folks? Is there anything that immediately pops out as like, you're not including this, or this is redundant with this other option? Very quickly, I know that it's small. The first one is a research object repository. So that's kind of putting together data, software, semantic objects, publications and documentation, and collections. So saying like, if you have any kind of repository, that's a service. Discovery services, services for direct research tasks, workflows and middleware, persistent identifier services, vocabulary and semantic object services, internal data management, so like not data management of your research objects, but data management of your own organizational information, service catalogs, and then considerations for security, identification, or AAI, and help desk. Ooh, training on the data, yeah. So this is where we're going to have to be careful with our list, because technically training on the data is part of services for direct research tasks. And this is where like the granularity of the GORC model is not well described in a questionnaire, because I don't want to give people a checklist of like, 80. So, but it is, okay, fine. No. If it's something that's important, we can absolutely bring it out. And this is part of the discussion too. Maybe the organization of the GORC model as is isn't appropriate for health data commons. Maybe we need to elevate that training to be its own category, which is kind of where the rest of these sit. Yeah, sure. I can repeat what you say, yeah. Yeah, so what Susanna said is it's really important to highlight this meeting the people part and this training aspect. And so especially for in the UK with the Biofair Commons, this is a really critical consideration and something they're trying to implement, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly. Excellent, yeah. So elevating this training aspect and support even is what it sounds like. It's the support itself goes beyond professional support that goes beyond help desk. Yeah, love that. Thank you.
We have the same in Sweden. They're very similar with the UK there. We also have the whole integration with the I think if you read this, you could consider that these parts would be within analysis or data acquisition, but it might be an idea to look over and granulate it a little bit more, maybe a separate idea. Also, I was thinking about training, because we were talking about training, and training the researchers in how to use data and do more data, and how to make data fair, I think is a very important part, especially for health data commons and the sensitive data side.
Oh, that's great.
Sorry. is there someone? Can I go?
ahead.
Okay. Hi. So I'm Heidi Leine from Finland, CSC. So we offer services for sensitive data, and also I'm representing a project called EOSC in Trust, where we are creating a network of trusted research environments in the European Open Science Cloud context. And I'm trying to think like how to formulate the question. So thinking about the Finnish national situation, for example, I wonder how this questionnaire could capture our national situation, where there are different organizations that work in kind of almost like a federated type of collaboration, where one organization is the data controller, and then there's another organization that grants the permits, and then there's a third organization that provides the computational capacity. So I think altogether they can be considered as a health data commons, but in the context of this questionnaire, I don't know how, like, can this questionnaire capture these types of settings? What do you think?
Yeah, so one of the key things that we do want to capture is federated systems, or even just like non-centralized systems where you're working with multiple organizations together in that network. So this is why I tried to phrase this particular question. So before you even get to the checkboxes to say like you're providing directly, like you own the infrastructure, or you personally employ all the people providing the service, or that you provide access to it. So in your context, it would be you're providing access to it, even though it might not be people in your, like under your supervision doing all of those services. And I would actually say the same thing for some of the infrastructure we have in Canada, where it's like, it's not everything is hosted necessarily by one person. And we actually see that more generally for commons. So maybe I'll bring it outwards from health for a second. The Digital Research Alliance of Canada we don't own our infrastructure. It's hosted by host sites. But we could still answer this particular part of the questionnaire and say like, oh yeah, we do offer research object repositories and blah, 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 because we're providing access to it. Like folks would not be able to access it easily or seamlessly if they weren't accessing it through this federation. So that's how I would say it fits in, is like considering that it's not something that you own or that you operate yourself or like your unit operates, but really looking at that, do you facilitate access to it? And if the answer is yes, then it would still be part of that commons umbrella that you're creating in your own context. We do have a question online first, Natalie, and then we'll go back to you. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
Is that working? Yeah, great. So one question, actually, one suggestion and a question. So the question first is, how do you see, because your point is, well, you talk about questionnaire. Do you really think, or did you consider choosing another form than a questionnaire? And I'm asking that actually because I think as having the conversation now, we had just some of the Dutch folks in the chat had a conversation, private conversation. I think thinking about what a commons is and how a commons is shaped in your country is maybe better written down if you do that in conversation. So why not see this as some kind of checklist where you meet with another country or example, and that you talk things over, and that you see it more as a topic list, and that way maybe you could even provide like well, I would say template or standard description, but I know that's also sometimes limiting people. Then they just follow the example, they only give the things provided in the example. But I was thinking maybe with some standardized template, arrange a conversation, let people talk to each other, like two different situations, maybe write it down and use that as input. I think that will have way more output. And then the second part that I wanted to add to that, what do you do? How do we capture if people are developing services? Because most often people are, well, having services, having some kind of vision towards the future, but what do you do when you are in between? So maybe something like now and future, or now and ambition, or vision, or mission. So sorry, lots of things to say, but it's really even for people that are, because I know I talked a lot to CJ, emailed a lot with CJ, and it's still hard to capture for me. Though I know we are providing within the Netherlands a commons, but it's still having difficulty to grasp it.
That was a little hard for me to hear in the room, but I think what I understood, and you can let me know if I'm paraphrasing improperly, is that what the questionnaire is kind of capturing a snapshot, but not the whole picture for these infrastructures, because it might not be what they want to do in the future, or some of the context in which they have to choose certain items, and other things can come out more naturally in conversation or maybe through like a presentation. Yeah, and so there was another question in the room, but something I will highlight here is that there is more questions, and they do kind of, oh my goodness, okay, Lauren has been busy with adding all of these subdisciplines, thank you. There are other questions here about your governance structure, what is your mission and vision, how do you describe your commons? So some of that comes out here, but really what we want to see is, would you be interested in participating in some of these synchronous conversations? So by filling out the questionnaire and giving us some preliminary data, we're hoping then to identify folks that would be interested in putting in more time into diving into that speaker series or diving into that community of practice. So I hope, so not necessarily, we know it can't be captured in a questionnaire, but we're hoping to use the questionnaire as the vehicle to identify who has the capacity and is interested in moving through that process. Yeah, so we can definitely start with like, would you like to participate? I will say that how, like in 1 or 2 sentences, how would you describe your commons? This was higher up originally, but yeah, so maybe just like a reorganization of what we want to get first in this questionnaire and reducing the number of questions because it has ballooned. Natalie, do you still have a question? Sure.
I think it's on the same topic. I think maybe we need to give guidance in number 13. And the reason is there's such a variety of things, like of different organizational setups, that if we can ask, you know, I don't know what they are, but maybe just saying describe your organization is probably not going to capture the bits and pieces that aren't being captured in the individual question. So I'll have a think about that. Yeah, sorry, I'm still thinking as I talk. Not very useful.
No, that's actually, that is really helpful because I purposely, when I wrote that question, I purposely left it super open because I knew that different commons or different infrastructures would describe themselves differently. And I wanted to kind of implicitly capture that in that question. But it does make sense to maybe provide a little more guidance. So this document will be open for suggestions and comments, and we'll continue to work on it. We're not sending it out tomorrow or anything like this. So yeah, please continue to think about it. Please go look at it and give us some feedback on it because we'd certainly love to have that, especially as you chew on it a little bit more. I'm going to move on from the questionnaire now and go back to our slides because we have a couple of presentations from folks that are already doing some of this work. So our first presentation is from Pascal, and I believe they're joining from online. So I don't have slides to show. We might need to switch our screen share unless there's no screen share needed.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for inviting me. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Yeah, okay. I'm going to share my slides. Wait a minute. Yeah, here we go. Share. So I'm joining from Portugal at the UFAR conference. I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to be brief. Present myself. So I'm Pascal Derek. I'm a data and semantic engineer working at Ciensano. It's a Belgian public health institute. And the past 2 years, we have, okay, here's the agenda. I would like to give you an introduction about the policy context, which is crucial to understand what we have been doing the past 2 years. And then I will explain why HealthDCAT, present you very quickly HealthDCAT AP in a nutshell, even if there's a lot to say. And I will provide you a link to the HealthDCAT AP specification. So let's start with the policy context, European health data space. So in Europe, we do have a new regulation, the European Health Data Space Regulation, which has a chapter on secondary use of health data. So this chapter is about creating a unified framework to facilitate the exchange of electronic health data across Europe for secondary use. So basically, if I have to give you some keywords, it's a governance body that's interoperability, the legal interoperability, the technical interoperability, the semantic interoperability. All this to enable the exchange of data. There are some provisions that I put there as some screenshots about duties of health data holders, or one about EU dataset catalog. So we are going to create a health data at EU infrastructure with federated datasets catalogs. And something that, because I've been leading the work package on the design of RDCAT application profile the past 2 years, something which is really core to this exercise is the data in scope of a regulation. Here, we are not speaking about one specific health domain. I was looking at your documents, but we are covering all type of data having an impact on health. Can be electronic health records, of course, but also environmental data. So there's a really, the regulation is really trying to capture and to provide meta descriptions of all type of data sets having an impact on health. The EHDS come with a vision. It's this user journey that I'm presenting to you, and I will only focus on this one, the data discovery. But the idea of the entire European health data space is to cover this user journey. It's for policy makers, it's for research, but it is really intended to be a full operational ecosystem where you will be able to collect data sets and send an application, data access application form, and to be in contact with intermediates that will help you in accessing sensitive data, for instance. Why HealthDCAT? So I'm going to speak about the common European data spaces. We try by using DCAT AP or HealthDCAT to address the aspect of data discoverability, interoperability, data usability, support also for advanced technologies like AI. This is not specific to HealthDCAT, it's specific to DCAT AP. So this is a core catalog vocabulary for all data spaces. And what we are doing with HealthDCAT is just to fine-tune this DCAT vocabulary, which is already in use in Europe. For instance, if you visit the Open Data Catalog, it has 2 million data sets described in one central place. We have been working the past 2 years on fine-tuning DCAT AP for the specific use of the European health data space. So here you see what is, I will say, nice with DCAT-AP, and here, if I look to the landscape analysis that we have done, I can't say that one metadata standard is better than another one, but I can just say that DCAT-AP is already in use in Europe and is flexible enough to be customized for a specific domain or for a regulation like the EHDS. Don't need to explain this. And here, maybe I will concentrate myself on the right part where definition of the requirements. That was an exercise that we done last year about defining all the requirements for extending DCAT for the health domain. And you can see here, we identified a number of requirements like the ones from the fair data principle. So looking at what is needed for the infrastructures, but not only, for instance, we look at the different EU policies which are already in place and are paving the way for an extensive use of data. So we have, for instance, the Data Act, which covers some aspect about data harmonization, or the Data Governance Act about the endpoints, the High Value Dataset Implementing Regulation, which is about creating rich metadata records. So we really investigated in all these requirements coming from different perspectives in order to design the RDCAT application profile. We are currently working on the central metadata catalog, and you can see here really for health DCAT metadata catalog, we will come with new properties which are really health-centric, something you will never see in another catalog. So for instance, a filter for the age range of the population size. That's things or metadata elements really focused on health. So in a nutshell, and I'm quite running, is you can see here that first of all, it's a good practice when you need to extend DCAT for a specific domain. You have first to look at the existing vocabularies or ontologies that you can reuse for your domain. So we added one property from Dublin Core, some properties from the data privacy vocabulary or data quality vocabulary. We have also added new properties, so creating a new namespace for health DCAT-AP with new properties that we identified as needed for, and keeping in mind that what we are doing, increasing the findability of health data sets, it's for the data users. And for this, in a way, we have to enter in their logic how to retrieve a data set or health data set. So we have introduced properties like population coverage. We also created new control vocabularies based on the Article 33, all the data set in scope of a regulation. We need to create a coherent semantic framework. So we need to rely on standardized terms. So we have here one example of control vocabulary that we are going to create, the one for cataloging health data sets, but also we'll need a registry of the health data access body. And then something special that we have identified as a requirement is to be able to use a large ontological domain database. So we are we would like, I will say, because it's an ongoing process, and we are discussing with our community to use Wikidata to speed up the implementation of EHDS. There are also things which are quite important for the RDCAT application profile. I said it's for the health data space, and here we have different data sets. We have data sets with different access rights. So we have open data, protected data, and sensitive data. So what we have decided to do is, based on the access right, to have different sets of minimal metadata elements. What I mean, different sets of cardinalities or different sets of mandatory properties in order to have, for instance, for sensitive data, richer metadata description than open data. Here you see from open data, protected and sensitive data, what we've got common is that for all of these three type of access rights, you have always a distribution. So the data, and it's really written in the, it's a provision of the regulation. If it's open data, you must have a landing page to access the data. The same thing for protected data, and for sensitive data, you've got a landing page of a health data access, the health data access body, which is an organization which will facilitate in your country the access to the data. So here you see for sensitive data, the health data containing personal electronic health data, we have these two properties which are really mandatory, the DCAT distribution and also the contact to the health data access body. Why we do have this as a provision in the EHDS regulation is that in any case, if the data is sensitive, you will always be able to discover the data set, and then you will have the possibility to submit a common data access application. So it's really embedded in the RDCAT application profile. So we really, when we were working on the RDCAT application profile design, we were really reviewing the regulation to identify all requirements. So the RDCAT AP is covering all the requirements derived from the regulation. We have also something that we have identified for sensitive data. You see here, it's having mockup data or synthetic data as a subset of a sensitive data. So the range is the CAT distribution, but we think in terms of supporting research, it's really a mandatory provision of the RDCAT application profile. And there's something also quite important. We are extending DCAT AP with CSVW vocabulary, the tabular data on the web, so that we are able to provide structural metadata as RDF for RDCAT AP. Here you are invited, if you are interested by this work, to have a look at the draft version of the RDCAT AP, which has been published beginning of the year. And I can say we are updating it almost every week with different inputs from our community. And that was for my presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Pascal. Do we have any time for one question if folks have something they'd like to ask at this time for Pascal? All right, not seeing anybody, I'm going to move it over to Bob Grossman, and we're going to be sharing slides on your behalf.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
All right. I am new to this working group, and so my apologies as I try to come up to speed. I'm going to report in about 10 minutes, a little less, on some of the health data commons work that I've been involved with in the US. Next slide. So to say the least, there are a lot of health data commons in the US, and having the ability to interoperate between them is becoming more and more critical. And so the question that a number of us have been working on is what metadata can these data commons, these health data commons expose that simplifies interoperability and that supports interoperability. As you heard in the first several talks today, this is a core issue of this working group, one of the core issues. And the terminology is a little different, but I think the goals are quite related. The context here are just when there are software platforms with a governance structure that allows a research community to manage, analyze, and share its data with the security and compliance required. How do those platforms interoperate when they can't contain health data? And what are the broad principles to improve the interoperability of these health data commons? Next slide. I'm going to talk about work that was sort of a number of governance committees over the last 3 or 4 years on around NIH and other commons that are operated containing data from some of the NIH institutes and centers, some private platforms, etc. There are 2 papers, one published, one in Scientific Data. I'm going to briefly describe this. Next slide. So the core context, these are the context here is to talk about what are secure and authorized environments for sensitive data, including healthcare data. These days, it's quite helpful to have an acronym that's easy to remember. So we're calling this SAFE for Secure and Authorized Fair Environment, but it's obviously quite related to secure analysis environments, to research enclaves, to a lot of work around platforms. These are the smallest number of principles and concepts and expose metadata that are being used to begin to interoperate some of the platforms I showed you and others. So we assume that we're using the term 2 cloud platforms. That's a generic term. These could be commons, repositories, analysis environments, but they're 2 environments that either contain healthcare data, health data, or can be used to analyze it. And the concepts are one of the platform contains data, and there's a formal right to distribute that data. This is to distinguish between whether data can be analyzed only within that platform or also that data can be distributed. The other platform in this case is the candidate authorized environment where authorized users can analyze the data. So the idea here is that the so-called sponsor, that is the person responsible for the cloud platform A, makes a determination that the environment, the cloud platform B, is authorized to support the analysis. So how that decision is made is outside the scope. Next slide. But there's a well-known principle in data governance that you authorize the users, mark the data, and trust the markings. This is so that when users do data contributed, when data is contributed with a data contributed agreement, users are authorized with the data use agreement. Data is authorized, data is marked with the appropriate markings, with metadata and other markings. That allows data to be used by authorized individuals. The question is, with today's health commons, what is the analogy for platforms? So this group came up with, authors are there. A lot of other people participated, but for various reasons, they could not be listed. This discussion went on for 2 years. Here, a security official or compliance official says a particular environment is authorized. There are trusted markings and a protocol to examine that. The principle here is authorize environments, authorize user, and trust the authorizations. So this is the idea that just as we have a principle for data and data governance, we should introduce a principle for platforms and platform governance. Next slide. So this is to put that sort of correspondence here, well understood of how we do data governance and what it means for a data set to be fair. We're trying to say, let's put platform governance at the same level. We call it safe or whatever it is, but this is similar, and this allows complementary so that platforms could be marked in the right way so they could be part of a safe process. And then that's the setup for forming more complicated relationships that we'll talk about next. Next slide. So here we proposed and are implementing, authorized platform identifiers that can be put in metadata, authorized platform network identifiers, and in the obvious ways, there's a trusted protocol to examine these and verify trust chain. You can move forward. Next slide. More recently, we've had a number of discussions because groups have set up multiple health data commons and interoperated them in different ways. Let's call that a mesh. We've tried to figure out what are the pillars for a mesh. Deadlines are important. So for this meeting today, we got this paper approved by all the authors to be put into archive yesterday. So we're in the process of adding more authors and getting this ready for publication, but this is the first version. We had a conference that sort of led to this paper with about 100 participants. Next slide. Here, the idea of a mesh is, or ecosystem, obviously related to health data commons as an ecosystem, but here a much more narrow definition when you have multiple platforms with some services so they can interoperate. And with typically there may be what we call a hub so that you could search across these platforms. What are the minimum pillars to support that? Next slide. There are a number of meshes we're involved with, and there are a number of meshes I learn about. These are some of the US meshes and Elixir and other meshes. So we have a lot of meshes. What are the smallest number of principles that would allow a mesh to interoperate? Next slide. So very importantly here, the data stays in their respective health data commons, except when it's transferred to an analysis environment, or except when there is the right to distribute the data to another platform or to another network. So that's the context. And it's very clear that if you keep to 10-minute talks, when you're told to do 10-minute talks, you live longer. So I'm going to finish this in the next minute or two, so I don't go over time. Next slide. Here, as you saw in the Health Data Commons GORC, where there are many, many dimensions and many, many sort of controlled vocabularies along those dimensions, you have different meshes, depending upon how strict or loose you are. I think everyone is used to fair, obviously everyone's used to fair and data governance. Our perspective here is to introduce safe and platform governance, and then to look at what we can get. Next slide. So, they're clearly, if a platform is going to join a mesh, the metadata, the data has to be fair. There has to be persistent identifiers. They have to have certain properties. There has to be APIs for Alt N, Alt Z between RDA and, we work a lot with GA4GH. Those are clear. We've talked about safe briefly. You need an API so that a safe environment can interoperate in a trusted way. Next slide. And then we introduced 5 other pillars, all described in this paper, based on our experience over the last several years of how to create, what's a mesh need. So, there has to be an agreement on this shared governance. There has to be agreement on what the basic objects are. Are there data sets? Are they fair? There has to be a mesh metadata service. There has to be a return of results so that the commons know. And there has to be a public interface for the mesh metadata. So I'm at time. I'll refer you to the paper. I'm very excited to be part of the GORC this particular GORC working group, and I'm still coming up to speed. So thank you. I think that's the last slide.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers. And before we move on to the wrapping up, we are a little bit over time, but are there any questions immediately in the room for Bob? Keeping in mind that you can always contact him afterwards. He is a co-chair of this working group, so we'll be around. And the paper is also up on archive. Congratulations, by the way. That's really exciting to get a first draft out. Rory.
Hi, thanks, Bob. That was a great presentation. So I've just been reflecting on the kind of interoperability which I've been thinking about more at the data and tool level, and how important interoperability between commons or meshes has become. And it seems like all of a sudden there's a proliferation of commons, or there's already a lot, and now they're being conceived of as commons. So this afternoon at 2:30, the RDA Research Data Architecture for in Research Institutions Group, for example, is giving our topic today is the implications of research data commons for institutions, because universities themselves also develop a lot of things which are actually commons. So that's yet another category of structure, VRE, whatever you want to call it. So I think this is really, I'm really struck by this kind of taking this up to the next level of thinking about fair for whatever you want to call them, commons, meshes, VREs, but also could relate to tools as well. And this clearly is an important emerging topic, which will impact on the GORC Health Working Group, but also lots of other things. So that was really stimulating. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you.
Hi, I almost would like to add another pillar there, pillar 11, even though 10 is probably a good number. And it's that the idea here is that the researchers would get data from different data commons, and then you aggregate data, harmonize data. At that point, the data might have changed form. It might have been curated a second time, cleaned, and this data would probably also need its own PID. It's the reuse data that others might want to reuse. And we deal with that with, like we have a platform that actually is for data sharing and is dealing with this particular problem.
I agree. We actually had a lot of discussion of that. We think that's very important. We felt that was addressed by other frameworks, and that kind of issue is very important, but was not a pillar for a mesh, but just best practice when you work with derived data. So, we'll probably, I think we need to talk about that more in the paper. It's not that it's not important, is just that comes up all the time, which is why it didn't make it to a pillar. But we hear you. That's obviously something very important. I'm trying to keep my job, and I'm 5 minutes late to another talk, so I'm going to have to drop off. If I lose my job, I won't be able to participate in this working group, so I'm going to drop off right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, and we're at the point where we're wrapping up as well. Lars, I'll let you take this part.
First and foremost, we're going to do a little bit of Menti again, but first I would like everyone to go into the collaborative notes and add their name and email, and especially if you want to contribute, add a little line on the end on what you would like to contribute with, so that we can contact you directly if you are interested in some sort of sub-project or other specifics, or if you just want to contribute in general, which we love. So we are going to do a little bit of Menti again.
While Lars brings up the Menti, Roy has already highlighted that if you want to continue this conversation in the same space on what does commons, data meshes, things working together, and interoperability mean, the Adari session is in breakout 2, but I'll also highlight that the GORC combined session is in breakout 2. So flip a coin and then figure out which one you'll go to in breakout 2, because unfortunately both of our sessions are at the same time.
Now that we have had our session, I would like you guys to think about the 3 questions that I asked in the beginning. How confident are you that you know what a health data commons is? How confident are you that you know what a global research commons is? And could you explain what HDCP for GORC IM is? This is a little help for us to see how well we were able to introduce you to this topic today. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll leave the Menti up for folks that are still in the
Yeah.
room. We encourage you to come up and talk to us afterwards. But because we are a little over time because we were late starting,
exactly.
we're going to let you go to lunch. Thank you so much. And Lauren, do you have any final remarks you'd like to add?
No, this is great. Thanks so much, and we'll be in touch. So this is the kickoff for the working group. So thanks for joining us, and we'll be in touch with details of when the next meetings will be.